Um, so little do people know, Storm is my godmother, and like she's really excited about me being in Chicago, so she summoned the rain for us. Storm, people will understand the reference, you know, it's like 2018, you know what X-Men is, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Just like wanted to make sure you can assume anything nowadays. So yeah, I had a really wonderful lunch with some of the students here earlier this afternoon, and the food was amazing. I feel very refreshed. The first vegetables I've had in a while. Thank you. More than that, I'm really excited to be here performing my poems. And I'm also excited to be in conversation with Omi later, where we're going to be getting into our feelings.
Wait, what?
No, I really appreciate all of you coming here on a Monday afternoon, especially right before finals are coming around, so thank you all so much. I want to begin with a poem thinking about my mother, because Mother's Day just passed, and I haven't had a relationship with my mother in quite a while, and to think about what that might mean nowadays is really complicated, because I have to think about what chosen family versus blood family has to mean. Blood family is this idea that, you know, you are always going to be connected to people based on the matter of your birth. And yet, when I think about what blood family can really mean, I have to think about the people who were there for me when my literal blood family abandoned me for being who I am. And I like to think about it as blood family is the people who I would bleed for regardless of the circumstance. It isn't because we share blood, it's the fact that we would spill blood to make sure that we survive. And in that, I'm really grateful that all of you are here, because I can see how important it is for centers like these. I guess these are the only two centers on this campus that focus on this kind of work. And that's just a fact. But to know that even in that scholarship, that there is the potential for really formative bonds, really intimate bonds, and you know, thinking about what intimacy can look like among people who do scholarship from marginalized perspectives on marginalized communities. You know, academia is not always cut and dry. And the fact of the matter is, academia, I think, is most successful when there is heart. So I say all that to thank you all for having me here. And this is the last leg of my tour, so thank you all so much. My selfies are an act of radical love, meaning I think my Instagram might be your guilty pleasure. Because I serve face like it's a gift from me to the masses, but I've never been a no-filter kind of woman. To look this good, it does take a little extra work, and hasn't every child learned to work it from their mother? Because my mother is a woman who sure knows how to work it, works it dawn till dusk with Photoshop for a living, perfecting every mall rat glamour shot until each duck face brims with plastic. At home, her cursor is a careful blade reassembling every family photo. My mother tells me when I was young, I never smiled in collared shirts, despite how suave a man I looked, each necktie strangling me alive, razor in hand. She sliced off each frown and pasted on a handsome grin. I'm a child when she guides me to her computer, teaches me this craft of transplant, says it is so easy to undo the flaws, to color correct our skin lighter and splice the foreign from our own bodies, and it's so haunting to walk in your front door and every family portrait hanging on your wall is of strangers. Because my gender-fucked body has only ever been picture imperfect, I've never recognized the boy in photographs. I stared myself in mirrors and only saw where a scalpel's touch could improve. I loved my body only in the language of dissection. In Photoshop, I learned to rewrite my boyhood with long hair, a ruby mouth, my slit eyes stretched wide, a real woman, molded from the pages of magazines. If only transitioning flesh were so simple. I can't help but think of Caitlyn Jenner and her iconic Vanity Fair cover, and all those hungry eyes eager to spot the Photoshop, as if to say, silly boy, don't you know that real women don't have secrets tucked between their legs? The truth is, that body she has is all hers. That pinched waist, those hollow cheeks, carved in all the right places. What I would give to have her riches, some blue eyes, an acceptable kind of feminine. I think how Caitlyn looks no different from the real white women who taught me and my mother to hate our skins. But I can't blame you either, Caitlyn. I do know exactly what it is to hunger for real womanhood, to make bloody murder of my mother's good skin, just so someone might call me beautiful. But when a man on the street clocks me, says, "Lady boy, you ready to love me long time?" I think, if I'm not real, if I will never pass for woman, then I must be fiction, must be a ghost caught on camera. And there's nothing scarier than a woman who refuses to die. Okay, emotional. Yeah, it's really interesting because I've never really done formal readings. I think of myself as a performer in addition to being a writer. And when I perform a lot, oftentimes in competitive contexts where people are in bars, drunk at like 8 p.m. And, you know, when people are really feeling themselves, feeling their emotions on a Thursday night at 7 p.m., as one does on a Thursday night, you know, people love to interact. And, you know, I would really love it tonight if anything might resonate with you, for you to clap and snap along and let me hear you. Like, I had like the best spring roll in a minute earlier. Earlier I was thinking about like woo, and like oftentimes those are the same moaning noises that people make at like competitive poetry slams. So I'm a huge proponent of making noise. You know, like if something feels you, if you're feeling me, let me feel you. Yeah. So next question. If your people have ever been colonized by the French, can I get a wee wee bitch?
Wee wee bitch.
Let's go. All right, so I just quit my job at Starbucks. And I was working there for 40 hours a week. I did the closing shift. I didn't get home till 1 a.m. And naturally in food service jobs, there are a lot of people who are ridiculous. And are people familiar with the idea of what a cognate is in linguistics or some shit? I don't know, I'm fake. It's one word that is one word in one language and then means something very similar in another language. So the ones I can think of in my head are like food related. So taco is a cognate for taco. And then when I get to Starbucks, like there's the most ridiculous like dude who comes in. I bet his dad's Irish and Italian or something. I bet his name's Buck or something. And like he's like, "Can I get a large coffee and a croissant?" And I'm like, there's like really too much energy to exert in a croissant. But like, right, croissant is a cognate for croissant. Yeah. I grew up in the South where there was a church on every block in my city except for like a handful. And so to grow up in a very religious, conservative place was very tricky, but then to also be queer and trans, in addition to being the child of refugees in a very immigrant-heavy neighborhood, was very interesting. And I didn't learn about what Vietnamese history was until I got into my Sunday Catholic Bible school. Because for some reason, I thought my history almost began at the Vietnam War, because that was how much I was ever taught about it. And to learn that there was a narrative beforehand was the most surprising thing to me. But the biggest irony of that was I also learned it in a religious context. So I'm gonna read this next poem. Everything I learned about hating myself, I learned in a classroom. The first time I learned my people's history was a bilingual Catholic Bible study. There I learned from 1874 to 1954 the French colonized Vietnam. The French called it a mission from God, called it modernizing a backward society. My people must have called it rice fields burning down, Europeans moving in, taking what's not theirs. Despite our words, history was never written in our favor, and now French cognates stain the Vietnamese language. For example, the Vietnamese café is derived from the French le café, meaning brown bodies bent over colonial cash crops, while our nimble fingers pick and pick away. Or cine, derived from le cinéma. Armed with cameras, the French captured the jungles of these darker colonies. Haiti, Senegal, Cambodia, Vietnam, all are faces like wild animals. Or pédé, derived from le pédéraste as in queer. Faggot, ladyboy, pedophile whose only instinct is sin. If this was the first word in my language that felt like mine and teacher, can you tell me why there is no place in God's kingdom for me? Missionaries gave my people the Sodom and Gomorrah to name ourselves dirty, condemned our skin, our queer, our gender. Sometimes when I use my mother tongue, I can still hear the colonizers speaking for me. Homosexuality is a distinctly Vietnamese affliction, a disease of heathens. Frenchmen, you must resist your urges when approaching the native populations of Vietnam. They are a godless species. Everything I learned about hating myself, I learned in a closet built by white men long ago. When I was 18, someone outed me to my mother, and she called me pédé, pédé, pédé. That word peeled my skin inside out. Her outrage was so familiar, a history repeating itself. I swear I could feel the French moving back in, hollowing out my sinful blood. Everything I've ever learned about hating myself, I learned through force-fed gospels and borrowed words. The colonizers are long gone, but languages have memories that last lifetimes. What a legacy to leave, to gift my people machetes to slaughter our own. Call me pédé or queer, call me any name you want, but I have spent my entire life listening to split tongues buried beneath etymology until I dared to reach in to discover a rebel tongue of my own. Call me pédé, call me queer, call me any name you want. But I've spent my entire life listening to split tongues buried beneath etymology until I dared to reach in, discovered a rebel tongue of my own. So call me resistance, rebellion, call me animal, daring to bite back our nimble fingers, stealing back the camera to expose all of history's white lies. I am a cognate, redefining, reclaiming words to name myself. So at the very least, you will call me a language back from the dead.
Yeah.
A little slip up at the end, emotional, because I don't tend to use my emotions on Mondays. I tend to reserve my emotions for like Tuesday from like 3 to 4 p.m. when I'm meeting with my therapist, just. So the fact that like on a Monday night I'm demanded to use my emotions, it's a little exercise for me, but I don't mind it. So I think of myself as a grammar nerd, but not in the traditional sense about like, oh, the Oxford Comma doesn't belong here, or there's there, and there. I'm a grammar nerd in the sense that I love to research why grammar has all these strange rules. Because I don't follow rules as a matter of principle, but if I'm gonna follow like a language's rules, I'm not gonna follow English's rules one of all, you know, like, I'd follow that language, but not English. English, you can't tell me anything. A little intimate moment there. So a lot of my work thinks through different components of English language. I think the biggest irony is often that when I do shows, I have to think that a century ago, most of the people in that room, we could not communicate with each other because we did not have access to the same language. And now we all are understanding each other, at least through the bare minimum of English. And that's a very scary thing to know, that the language that is passed down through assimilation is also a language that we have to use as diasporic bodies in order to recommunicate with each other. And I think in that contradiction is where diasporic narratives get to live. And that is in the perpetual idea of like contradiction. So I love verbs, but not really. In English, most verbs are conjugated into the past tense using the suffix ed. Example, she lives, present tense. She lived, past tense. English is such a subtle language. Do you see how just a single consonant makes a body unbirth itself? How if we don't command grammar with precision, we may accidentally resurrect the dead. In English, transgender is an adjective, but transgender is commonly misused as a verb. Example, she is transgendered. The grammar begs the questions. What happened to her? What made her this way? Where did her body go? Nothing about grammar is ever coincidence. Language reflects how we think, what we really mean, who we've learned to be worthy of living. A transgendered body, then, must only exist in the past tense. A transgendered body must have asked for it. A transgendered body cannot exist here and now, cannot ever be present, not even for its own wake. In 2017, we learned of at least 26 transgender people murdered in the US alone. Or would it be more precise to say 26 bodies were transgendered? Doesn't that say enough? Doesn't that say what we really mean? But I need you to know that that number isn't precise either. We don't know of how many bodies were inscribed in obituaries with false pronouns. We don't know how many bodies lacked the lexicons to give their deaths proper names. But today, I will speak without precision. I will be fluent in excess. I stand right here, a tender mouth daring to whisper from the afterlife. Yesterday, I was transgender. Today, I am still transgender. Tomorrow, I will still be transgendered, even if it means teaching my tongue the art of necromancy. The dead will speak every time I refuse the past tense. Every breath I take will turn back time, will unbury the body. Grammar, it will just be the coffin I rise from when language fails us all. So I really want to, when I first moved from Oklahoma to Rhode Island, that is moving from the South to New England, you know, you get the perpetual narrative of, you know, like people asking where you're from, and you know, like, you say the city, and the person's like, where are you really from? And you're, you know, we got it, it's 2018. It's almost cliche at that point to say the full script because it's so deeply ingrained. And yet, because it's so deeply ingrained, I was so thrown off when like that conversation turned a twist, because in the eventual, where are you from? I'm from Oklahoma, but where are you really from? Oklahoma. And then she's like, oh, you know, like I'm expecting her to say, but like, oh, but where are your parents from? No. Barbara, Babs. Babs is like, you sure you don't mean Yoko Ono or Okinawa? And I'm like, well, Babs, no, Oklahoma. And she's like, well, do they even have Asian people in the South? And I'm like, No, there is. And I wanted to go Wikipedia on her and be like, well, the U.S. enacted policy scattering the Vietnam War in order to prevent ethnic enclaves from forming because of previous immigrant movements. But no. She was just like, you must be from a Chinatown if you're from the South. And I was like, excuse me, Babs, again? And there was accuracy in it because I did grow up in the migrant neighborhood, and I wanted to write an ode to the neighborhood that I come from. But yeah, fuck Babs, right?
Yeah.
But my lineage has always been Little Saigon asphalt, 3 generations living under one roof and motherland recipes. On Saturdays, my family would congregate at our favorite restaurant, Gim Funk. Here, we would worship the hot pot, stuff our bellies full of blessings. My auntie says, if we're going to suffer, we gotta do it over good food. Down here, the pavement is cracked, but we know exactly what to do. After all, this is a neighborhood of necessity. I remember the first time I ever saw white faces descend upon Little Saigon, their crooked beaks eager to pick meat from these streets, squawking about craft beer and raw denim. Their foreign tongues always butcher every name on the menu, and of course, all their Yelp reviews sound the same. I discovered a real gem in Little Saigon, so authentic. I give it 4 stars, could have been 5 if only the waitress smiled more. And now Gim Funk has a 30-minute wait, plays Radiohead instead of traditional ballads. All the waitresses speak enough English to accommodate vegan diets. Food bloggers all praise the tabernacle of my childhood, beg to know the magic of my people. Did you know in the 1800s, anti-immigrant riots ignited violence against the Chinese? Finding refuge in each other, they kindled new homes, called them Chinatowns. Haven't Asian American enclaves always been these neighborhoods of necessity? Before my people built our Little Saigon, white flight to the suburbs sucked my city's economy down to its marrow. But my people know how to take someone's leftovers and forge something beautiful. Funny how our city would be boneyard without us. Now, white folks flock back to the streets they deserted, rediscover everything we rebuilt. Of course, we've learned how to be digestible, how to shove our limbs into takeout boxes, how to skin ourselves and sell our flesh for profit. Now, the owners of Gim Funk can pay off debt, send all their daughters to college, but when the restaurant burns down one winter night, they do not shed a tear. They've slicked enough white wallets to rebuild everything. In Vietnamese, Gim Funk means golden phoenix. I don't say this for the irony. It is not this poem's punchline. It is my people's expectation that everything that has ever been ours can one day burn. Whether it's Koreatown, Little India, Bangladesh, or Little Manila, no matter how many pick at the bones of immigrant communities, we will endure the scorch and cackle with a smile. These are neighborhoods of necessity, always having to cook up the most authentic kind of survival. After all, if we're going to suffer, we gotta do it over good food. So, I like to think about poems as being little types of prayers that I need. And kind of right now, I'm reevaluating my relationship to God, as one does in their 20s. The perpetual, I don't know what my relationship with God is. I don't know what God means to me. And oftentimes, I think that poems can be very intentional prayers that you send off into the universe in order to hopefully make them manifest a feeling. And so I have a friend who's going through it right now, and you know, I don't know how much is okay to share in public, but yeah, her name's Scarlett, and she's really going through like really intense things in terms of like where she thinks her life is headed. And you know, I wrote this poem one night out of a need to say like it's going to be okay. So you mean like we're not really close friends, but like her name is Scarlett Johansson. So if you would, I would love for you all to help me offer this prayer up to the Lord. I've been worried about you, girl. I finally watched her the other week. While you offered a thrilling performance as the voice of Siri, sexing up Joaquin Phoenix, I just gotta ask, why do you keep playing robots? I mean, I get it. I think of myself as a cyborg feminist bitch too. As a little trans girl, Transformers was like really meaningful for me. Robots in disguise, me too. But then I watched Lucy and I got really confused because you fought the Korean mafia, gained superpowers, and bent the logics of a million space-time continuums. And you are telling me that by the end of the movie, you become a USB flash drive? Now, I just watched you in the trailer for this new movie. I can't really think of the name, Ghost in the Shell. I just gotta say, you look fierce. I guess those commissioned visual effects tests to make your face look more Asian must have really worked out. But if you want this face so bad, have it. No CGI needed, I'll give it to you. Neatly plated on a porcelain platter, but if you, Scarlett, are made to look like me, will you also inherit all of my self-loathing? All of my buck-teeth burdens, all this dreaming of how to escape the coin slot pinch contour of my smile. You will finally learn what it is to own a quiet face. The kind made into mincemeat on the cutting room floor, skin as flimsy as analog film. It isn't your fault, Scarlett. You've always known how to be full of fight, how to be so comfortable with learning to love everything white feminists find unlovable about themselves. But the king and I, breakfast at Tiffany's, The Last Airbender, I spent a childhood watching actors pull back the double folds of their eyelids, their heavy squints waiting to crack under all that heavy paint. So what can we have, if not our birthrights, our jawbones, if not our own fucking stories, if not everything our mothers and their mothers fought to call their own, even without clothes on their backs, just bare skin in the velvet death of winter for so long. I wished I could crawl head first into someone else's skin until Hollywood named my own profitable. Now I imagine your alabaster faces melting like candle wax, begging to unstitch my mouth. Tell me, what is more Asian than being a speechless robot, mass-produced for the masters of humiliation, a body manufactured again and again until it has no lips to speak of an origin? Here I am, Scarlett, docile, quiet, tongue bow tied to the bottom of an uncanny valley, but my eyeballs are right here, watching you and every other actor whose skin now glistens in its fresh coat of gold. I've seen the Yellowface movie too many times. I know how this script goes by now. Everyone else in the theater unbothered, while I sweat, I fume, I steam, I scream as loudly as I can, despite not owning a mouth. Yeah, so sometimes when I do poems, I add prefaces, but I also want to add a suffix, because I think I have a very complicated relationship about what visibility means, and I think often when I see a lot of visible Asian American large-scale organizing or activism, I find that it's often centered on the idea of media representation. And I find that media representation is one, a facet of like how political organizing movements become co-opted for neoliberal purposes, meaning that like I don't really understand why I would focus my energy on making sure an Asian American actor gets paid 10 million instead of 2 million. And sure, there is a disparity. There is, you know, the gap. And yet, I have not often found that as a queer and trans feminine body, visibility has always served me in the ways that it might serve cis Asian Americans. And I really have to think about what it means for me to be hyper visible in some degree, because you know, I've had the alt-right trolls come for me. I've had the TERFs call for my name on stick. I've had people who want me because they find one small thing that I wrote and then they want to dox me. And that's when I begin to think that like visibility is complicated, because there's so few people who are risking that sort of like ability to be out in public naming their transness. And yet I know that that comes with a risk. And yet I have to remind myself that often can visibility outweigh the risk of hypervisibility. I'm not sure I know that. Are you all familiar with the image of, from the Vietnam War? It was like the photo of the year, the 9-year-old girl after a napalm attack on a village. So when that image was first being circulated among journalists, I don't know, journalists didn't have group chats back then, but I imagine they like sent a carrier pigeon across the ocean and was like, what do you think about this JPEG? And they weren't doing JPEG, they were about this film strip. I don't know. But they were unsure about whether or not to have her image in such a hyper-visible place, because she was naked and she was under 10 years old. And eventually they decided that the image should be published uncensored, because the informational value of showing how bad things had gotten in the Vietnam War, wanting to display that kind of violence and informing the rest of the world, was more important than her own personal privacy. And that's when I have to remind myself that sometimes, you know, can visibility be a sacrifice for the greater good, if there is anything to think about that. So I'm moving to my next poem. Last May, a man I did not know recorded a Snapchat video of me at the gas station. I close my eyes and still hear him laughing. How he must have sent the video to all his friends, how it was not the first time a woman like me had her image stolen. Snap! In the 1980s, New York City police raided queer bars, handcuffing bodies whose legal sex not align with their appearance. A reminder, gender must be a fragile shot glass I'm afraid to spill out of. The Queen's mugshots hang on New York police precinct walls, a muck of pigs cackling at the men in dresses they rounded up. I close my eyes and hear their neck bones snap, hear the beat faces before they're bruised. Snap! During the Vietnam War, cameras fire away as my motherland splits in half, as napalm incinerates a village, as the Pulitzer Prize goes to the photo of a 9-year-old girl running beneath a scorching rain, her naked body on fire. Snap! Beneath the American gaze, aren't I always a body on fire? The world eager to see me naked, to see what's between my legs. Funny how men will post my image for likes, but never admit to liking trans women. A reminder, from bathroom bills to constant cat calls. I guess trans women should be ashamed for daring to exist. Blink again, and my life ends before it even begins. I stand here before all of you with the kind of beauty that must be witnessed in the flesh in order to be believed, so I dare you. Snap your photos, take your shots, you may steal my image, but I know that you will never, never capture me. I'm going to do 2 more poems, and I wanted to share that I do have some books up for sale. I'm taking Venmo, credit card, cash, your newborn baby, your left arm, a strain of your hair for potions, whatever it is, let's work it out. But more than anything, I think often when trans people and trans feminine people who have had the act of being disowned, speak out their narrative, there is always a constant sort of depressing aspect to it, like there's a hopelessness that things just get worse and worse. And that was kind of like the thing about what it gets better. That's what I struggled with the It Gets Better movement back in 2006 or 2008. Because when I was a young queer and trans child, things did not get better for me. And in fact, even as an adult, when I did transition, things got actually a whole lot worse. I lost my family. I lost the people who were always there for me. And I never imagined, if it got better, I thought I'd be on, in Glee, going down New York, doing Alicia Keys numbers on Broadway Street, but no, things got worse. And I don't mean to say that narratives of queerness always end up in tragedy, but it does get exhausting when those are often the ones that are most provocative and evocative because, they catch people's attention. How often do you hear stories about joy? When was the last time you were genuinely happy that someone else was happy? Because it's so much easier to access pain and violence, especially when we come from marginalized experiences where that is a way that we relate. I had a friend who once told me that she does not, identify with oppression. And so for her to think about where we create solidarity among different communities, it's not always based on what we both suffer from. It's the fact that we can create joy together in the absence of joy. I say all that because in this past year, I've been really developing a relationship with my father. And I really love him. I think he's a July 1st. Is he a Leo?
Cancer.
He's a Cancer. Oh, he's such a Cancer. My dad, and he doesn't even know when his birthday is. He's in Vietnam we never kept birth records. So I remembered where the stars were on my birthday when I was first born, and I just backtracked. And I'm like, Tony. No, I don't call my dad by Tony. That was for emphasis, because if I call my dad Tony, bam. But no, I was like, Dad, how did you know that? He's like, when you're psychic, you just know. So I have a lot of love for my dad, because he's always taught me to believe in the invisible. And after I was outed, I never formally came out to anyone in my family. I never offered them that kind of, formality, because I didn't receive the formality of anything. And it wasn't a formality, in fact, I was a casualty of it. No. Alright, I'll try again. But in developing a relationship with my father, I learned that love can surprise you in mysterious ways. That's a religious quote? Okay. But love can heal you in mysterious ways too. And I always wanted to offer this short poem to my father, and I found hope when I least expected it. My father named me after Christopher Columbus, as a colonizer, as a false god of discovery. My abandoned name, Christopher, means bearer of Christ, a deep irony. Because I've never known a god that wasn't named after a man. In grade school, white classmates butchered my last name, Tran, called me Tranny before I understood the price of bleeding like a woman. Ironic, I did transition and that did cost me my blood family. But this year, 1 year after coming out to my father, he gives me a birthday card addressed to Chrysanthemum Tran. I wonder if seeing my chosen name in his handwriting is love, or at least loving me enough to let go of the boy he wanted me to be in order to fully love the woman I have become. Despite being named after Columbus, I discovered myself, discovered my womanhood, discovered my body is a country that can never be colonized. I made the greatest discovery of all, my father's love for his daughter. I'm going to end this with one last poem before I head into this non-emotional conversation with Omi. There's not going to be no tears allowed. You know on Sims, when you're hungry, you can visualize it. If the emotion meter goes above here, you just gotta leave. You just have to go home. So if you're ready, Omi, I'm totally ready. If you're ready to walk out, if that emotion meter hits above that, I'm ready to bounce and fight. So when I think about, I'm often asked who I consider my trans sisters. One, because people want to ask what Marcia and Sylvia mean to me, because it's a good tokenizing question, and I love to answer that I of course would not be here without them and their labor. And often I find that women like them were mythologized. Marcia literally did not throw the first brick. She was chilling at home for a little bit. And in fact, it was a black lesbian who was a black cis lesbian who threw the first, who ignited the first movement against the police during Stonewall. There's a lot of lies that are construed when history is passed down. And that makes sense because when history happens, how accurate can you be when, when you're being gassed, when there's lights beaming all around you? The accuracy is not always going to be there. And yet, because of that, it's really easy to mythologize certain figures. And so we have this idea of Sylvia and Marcia as these mothers who, sat around in their lounge and smoked cigarettes while being oh, honey, come to... No, they were organizers. They were homeless, and they helped other homeless trans people. And they really focused on the HIV positive trans girls too. And so I feel all that kind of labor is often diminished when we reduce them down to the single brick. This is a single brick thrown at Stonewall, and so that's why we should care. No, we should care because New York was a central place for queer organizing, especially from Black and Latinx queer and trans people. And because of their labor now, there's so many trans girls who get to live, perhaps not as long, but they do get to live, and they do get to breathe. And I want to switch gears and think about what poetry can mean, because I'm really grateful that you all are listening to poetry. The arts is under attack in terms of financial aid, financial support from the government. And I went to public school from pre-K to 12. I went to public school, and I went to the 49th worst public school district in this country, in Oklahoma. And it makes sense why there's so many people who don't envision themselves in curriculum, or curriculamas. Because when you can't envision yourself in curriculum, how can you envision yourself outside of that context? How can you envision a future in which your history is not being told? How can you begin to think about your present, or even what you can imagine as possible, when you're not even shown what has ever been happened to your people? And when I first learned poetry, I was reading the works of Robert Frost, and dang, that man loved him some trees. Loved trees, really, if it wasn't trees, it was flowers. If it wasn't trees, it was grass. And I was okay, Rob, I really get it. And no diss to trees. I think trees are a valid thing to write about in your creative practice. I love breathing. I love to live, I love to laugh, I love to cry, I love to breathe. Trees are great. And yet, you know, those were the kind of poetry that did not resonate with me because I didn't understand what this man had to say that resonated with me. And I thought poetry was very exclusive, that, you know, you had to have degrees and, you know, you had to memorize half the dictionary to know how to describe trees and stuff. And it wasn't until I read the work of Maya Angelou. And when I was in high school, I had a lesbian English teacher who I asked for writers from different experiences. So she gave me a lot of authors' names, and they were many women. They were many queer and lesbian women and gay women, and there were a lot of Black, Latinx, Native, and Asian women. And I'd never seen a kind of, you know, I didn't realize that literature existed. And so when I began to read Maya Angelou, something changed in me because I didn't realize that poetry could have that kind of work that was beyond trees. I found the work of a woman who spoke about her honest and vulnerable self and shared herself using this particular technique that I've never really seen associated with Black women before. And, you know, the gag is, like, Black people have been doing poetry forever, communities of color have been doing poetry forever, and yet that isn't elevated in our education. And I think I say all this because Maya Angelou deeply impacted me, even though we don't share the same identities or life experiences. I do consider her a very key ancestor for me because without her, I would not be where I think I am today. And I think there are a lot of people who can owe our lineage to. And oftentimes, we can often owe our survival to the people who are in the rooms with us, who are friends and chosen family, who help us live. And that's a lineage that you're building currently. So as the school semester ends, as you move on to the next stages of your summer or even after graduation, I really want to encourage all of you to remember that your family building starts now. Your lineage making has already started. You're already part of a long lineage. Who can you point to in the past and say, I actually wouldn't be here without that person's labor? And oftentimes, it won't be people you immediately find yourselves related to. But, you know, Robert Frost wrote about trees, and Maya Angelou wrote about honest things that I fell in love with. And for me, she helped me breathe. She offered the trees that Robert Frost could never offer me. So I have this last poem as an homage to her work, Phenomenal Woman. It's after her poem, Phenomenal Woman. And I can't think of any other way to begin this poem than to say that I'm messy and I get into fights. Sometimes online. I don't get into physical fights anymore because I'm over 18 and I can't have that on my record. But I get onto fights online sometimes. So, thank you all so much. After Maya Angelou. So the cisgender woman on Facebook wonders if trans bathroom bills will put her in danger. She doesn't believe me when I say trans girls just want to pee. Just want to not be arrested for having a body that must empty itself. She says, I could never understand. I'm not a, quote, biological woman. And I think how no one actually knows the number of chromosomes our body owns. How our genitals meant nothing before doctors christened them with convenient names, and still, puberty, with its cracked voice and overgrowth of armpit hair, must make my biology obvious. Except to the man in the Walmart bathroom who saw my long hair and lipstick and threatened to empty all the blood from my skull. You see, cis men threatened by trans women will always ensure our bodies empty themselves, our biology obvious and flaccid on the bathroom floor. And doesn't that make me a woman? Biologically. A biological woman. That's me. And I am still woman. With or without hormones, a sprouting chest, a fresh manicure, and a beat face. But all this can't be explained by DNA, no. Not when you transcend biology. Did you know I'm supernova? All cosmic and dark energy, total eclipse of the arteries. How I drink all the water on Mars and call that blood. I'm so woman. People see me and think, what a fine crater to fit my knuckles into. An extraterrestrial gender, disrupting the very fabric of family values. Because if I ride the bus home and nobody makes a myth out of me, if nobody enters my orbit and calls me a name unfit for a god of war, that must be unexplained phenomenon. After all, what is a trans girl if not defying gravity? If not an always falling star, maybe constellations are just clusters of women who have lived before me, illuminating the sky so I always make it home safe. Maybe I've got a galaxy for a womb. Every time a trans girl dies, I give birth to one more shooting star and watch how the whole world makes a wish on our dimming fire, and watch how we still dare to burn brighter. Biology can't explain that. No, not this kind of flesh and blood, ashes to ashes, stardust to stardust. You are threatened by me. Good. Now, doesn't that make me a woman, biologically? Thank you so much.
Are we supposed to be taking a break, or we're just going to jump right into it?
You can jump right into it.
Can we just jump right into it? Okay.
I need a break. I'm not weak. Quote,
I need a
weak.
break.
I am so weak.
I'm having so many feelings. My God. Well, thank you for that.
Yes.
For taking the time to come to us. And what you did today and what I've seen you do before, some of the work that I encountered online and stuff, I noticed that one of the recurring themes was about not having the right words for something always. And so what your work has taught me, or something that I've learned from your work, is how to speak with like a bold philosophy from life, for life, from a position where you can't find the right words, which I think is really hard to do. So thank you. And I want to thank you again for that performance. That was amazing. Also, thank you guys for coming out on a Monday night. So my first question, to kind of kick us off, and there's a lot of folks, and I think it'd be great if we could just kind of open it up pretty quickly. But I do want to ask, so where are you from?
Where am I from?
Like, where are you from?
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. That's
No,
not
absolutely. I think about when I come from. I think about, like, I was inside of a human once. No, I'm kidding.
When a mommy and a daddy love each other very much.
And the storks, like, get in there too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, like, the government gets involved at some point. Yeah, no.
I don't know what you're talking about. My parents are virgins.
Did you know your parents had sex to have you?
No. No, I'm Chinese and sexuality doesn't exist. So, okay, anyways. Okay, real questions. Well, I wanted to just kind of start right in the middle of it. Today here that you have talked about in the past in other venues was about the, let's say, the care and the responsibility of having the privilege of public creativity. And so I was hoping that you could just say a little bit about how it is that you come to that responsibility. How is it that you kind of experience yourself as giving voice precisely for those people who don't have the right words and haven't figured out, like you have yet, how to speak with that kind of veracity? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would say I don't know if I ever thought I would be in a position of authority to say anything that meant anything important. And I don't know if I'm so convinced that I do. And I think because of the novelty of my identities in tandem, especially when we are in this kind of age where, you know, we're very explicitly looking for people with multiple marginalized identities. That's a very intentional decision that, you know, venues and schools make when inviting speakers because of how the free speech conversation has, you know, drifted across college campuses. I find that I have to be very responsible and careful with my intentions, too, that I don't ever try to aim to speak for anyone except for myself. And I think like the pronoun I was like really crucial in my poetry, that like I'm always relating it back to my own experience. And even if I'm speaking outside of my experience, it's not for the intention of, you know, provocation. It's for the public work of being able to connect myself to different stories, which is, you know, like how people navigate the real world. You know, like we watch TV shows that don't always reflect who we look like, but we're able to identify with the narrative, and it almost feels like a colorblind kind of approach sometimes. That like it doesn't matter what color you are, but like I can get your story at the end of the day. And there has to be like another layer on top of that. Like you can understand my story, spend 15 minutes with me, but I want you to know that race and gender also color my story too. And you know, I feel like I come from a position of privilege in order to be able to have authority. That is how privilege and authority works at the institutional level. You have to have access to it. And my notoriety really came after I competed in the Women of the World Poetry Slam, which is the largest poetry slam for poets who are women, trans, and or non-binary. And I was the first finalist for that tournament who was transfeminine or a trans woman. And there was a lot of responsibility after that because I represented a voice within that community that had never been recognized or necessarily valued. And I have to be really careful with what I say because even if I only aim to speak for myself, there are those who wish to apply my own experience to other facets. So I have to understand how to be specific about myself while also being able to name that I'm not speaking for anyone except for what I know. And it's really hard because that's not how we talk about ourselves, you know, like we are gossipy people. We love talking about other people. And part of that care is being able to know what are my limits.
Yeah, I mean that's really helpful for me. I mean in terms of like I think about that kind of responsibility or authority typically in relation to being a writer and then being a teacher. And one of the things that I have learned teaching the class that I'm teaching now, the queer or queer of color critique, I looked it up, so now I know. I'm not kidding. And it is exactly how difficult it is. Like one of the things that we've learned in our class is always about how the right words are always just out of reach and you feel like you're about to feel a thought out, but you can never quite can get there. And, you know, I opened the questions with, like I said, an expression of gratitude about you being able to do that, even from that position of precarity. I kind of wish that I had made this mandatory now for my students. Because I think we'd have a lot to learn from being able to do that. So thank you. Oh, by the way, because I noticed just it's late and people have homework and things, I know you do if you're in my class. And so if you guys want to just, like if you guys have questions, I know there's this like corner of people looking really guilty. If you guys have questions, I encourage you to just kind of raise your hand and jump. I'd rather, and I don't know, I'd rather hear other people's questions than my own. And so if people have questions, just please, raise your hand or be known somehow.
I guess I would be really interested before that is to also know in the context of your queer, queer critique class,
Sounds about right, yeah.
I would love to think about, what do you think has been the biggest takeaway for you or your students this quarter so far?
Wait. I thought I was asking that question.
I'd love to know just like where we are in terms of like where the approach is right now. Or if anyone in the audience would love to feel that out, like what do you think is the biggest takeaway that you've gotten from your class so far?
You're like, oh my god, what did I get myself into? I'm never going to anything ever again.
I'm gonna put it in one sentence.
Okay, fine. I'll save you. What was the question again?
What do you feel has been like the most surprising takeaway that you or your students have had in your class this quarter?
Okay. I have a very specific I have a very specific answer for that. I don't know if the people in the class share the experience. I mean, because, you know, as a student, as a teacher, your experience of the space is very, very different. I think for me, the biggest surprise was just how hard I had failed at my dreams for the course. And by that I mean, the course was imagined, and this was in the course description, and it was just like a promise that I couldn't keep, which was wanting to try and use queer of color critique as a field, as a framework, to reimagine what it would be like, reimagine what queer theory would be like if we didn't presume from the outset that its subject was white. Mm-hmm. Like, what if, could it be possible to displace that subject and to imagine a person of color as the subject of queer theory? What would happen to the rest of it if we tried to build like a queer approach around that? And we did not figure out how to do that yet. And I suppose if somebody does, then like you've saved the world and you should let us know how to do it. But I realized it was because like we're not taught growing up. I mean, you said this, what was the line? Everything I learned about how to hate myself, I learned in the classroom, right? Like, I'm experiencing this with this class in the sense that, like, we have not learned growing up how to read queer of color critique. Because we haven't learned how to read from the perspectives outside of the canon. And so it's taking a lot more labor and time and effort for people to kind of come to the ideas that are at the margins, precisely because we've been trained to read at the center. I don't know if that's a fair, So I'm like, oh, we're having trouble kind of getting there. That would be my response to that.
Thank you. I really resonate with that idea because, I don't know, even I just talked in the class, but I am interested in like what you are studying because, queer color critique courses are not so common even at the undergraduate level. And I do find myself, it's hard to relate to queerness or representations of queerness, whether it's canonically or in terms of media, because queerness was introduced to me as white, that queerness was inherently emerging from a place of whiteness, and so I can't understand my own experience without whiteness, because regardless of what I'd love to imagine my future as, I can't imagine my own experience or queerness without being affected by whiteness, because whiteness has informed how I understand queerness in the first place. Because, I can't even imagine, I do feel like undergraduates often learn like Judith Butler and other white queer scholars, and I don't think I've ever seen any sort of course begin with like Roderick Ferguson or Jose Munoz, and I wonder how that would even begin with like those kinds of scholars who, from the beginning, humanize you from the get-go.
I agree.
I'm really interested in this course that you're teaching.
Me too. Sorry. No, while you were talking, I was thinking about how there should be a word for that. A word for like how to identify with queerness when queerness was always white and you are a person of color, but you want to be the subject of queerness and it doesn't want you, but you want to hold it tight, but it hurts. Like there should be a word for that.
It's identification.
I know, but it doesn't feel so. Yes, this is one of the words that we keep using in class, right? We were like, disidentification. But like, oh, now he's shrugging at me. No. Okay.
I understand though, because this identification often does feel like a clinical approach, because I've never thought about how to relate to whiteness until I was familiar with Munoz's work. And so I had to learn how to practice that relationship to white queerness through a methodical academic context. And it doesn't represent, like how we actually necessarily always envision our relationships to queerness outside of the classroom. And so yeah, like it is this identification, but like on the day-to-day level, when I'm like watching Glee, because I'm regretful. Yeah, it's accurate to say like I'm disidentifying with the characters, but at the same time, like I'm not just disidentifying them. Like, I'm full on standing like Chris Colfer's character in Glee. Like I love this porcelain doll baby face, and like he's an emblem of like white twink queerness, and yet I still cried when he came out to his dad. Like, and I don't know how to name a specific like ability to be cognizant of critique, while also being able to find not just acceptance, but genuine joy and pleasure out of different aspects. Like, yeah, I love Glee, and I'm not afraid to say it. But I'm actually deeply ashamed.
Why? Because it's so great.
It really is. It really is. In all honesty, like when I think about like canonical, like white queer media, I didn't grow up in the age of Queer as Folk. I was like years after that. The L word was just ending when I was coming into my queerness, and so I got this like millennial approach to queerness, and it was really like the post 9/11, post it gets better, post. If you work at it, you're going to survive one day. And we're all going to be happy at the end of it. And I really felt like those were the narratives demonstrated through Glee. And I really had this fixed idea that moving from the South to the North, by moving from the South to New York in particular, like all my queer traumas would be solved. But it turns out like when I did go to New York, like, oh, like you just have trauma and you need a therapist for that. You can't solve those underlying issues of feeling unloved and ashamed about your body and your sexuality and your gender just by escaping to a place where you feel more accepted. Or at least I won't say you, I'll say like, I didn't find that. And what I did find, like I found queerness and love and support through like, dinners with friends who I never thought I would be able to, have. I never thought I would be able to be seen as human and recognized, and not have to hide parts of myself in order to be loved and appreciated. And that was jarring for me. Like, you still like me even though I'm queer? And it feels like a different time now, but like, for the longest time, I was so deathly afraid that I was so deeply afraid of what the South would do to me as a queer body. And I don't think I was ready either for the racism in the North. I think that's a kind of a different approach too.
Yeah, I have a similar experience of, well, I didn't actually grow up in the South. I grew up in West Covina.
West Covina.
I know. You're the first person to make that joke. And I know, it's so weird now saying that. Before I used to say, oh, I grew up in LA, but you start downtown, you jump on the 10, you drive east until people stop speaking English, and then that's where I grew up. But then now we have Crazy Ex-Girlfriend and everybody knows exactly But I did the thing where I was like, oh, like I'm gonna leave and go as far away from home as humanly possible. I'll go to Massachusetts. I know, it was like a perfect, right? And then you experience, and I'd be interested in hearing you say more about like the difference, like racism, the way that race changes across time and across spaces, right? Means also in a way that racism changes across time and across spaces. So I'm curious about like how it is that you managed and experienced that. I mean, the ways that, you know, in a place like Southern California, racism takes a particular form of like an anti-immigrant politics. Racism takes the particular shape of a weird kind of backlash in relation to schools and affirmative action. And in Massachusetts, it takes the shape of something like, so tell me what your people think about this. Oh my God, your name is so beautiful. What does it mean? Or something. And so I'm like, oh, okay, this is better, I think. So, like, this is like a long-winded way of saying, how is it that you've imagined your work, your relationship with race, your relationship with sexuality having shifted, not just in relation to points in your life, but also in relation to the places that you've been?
Yeah, I think I would mark like New England racism as a type of liberal racism where people at least understand race to some degree so that they feel inclined or entitled to asking questions that are a bit more intimate and personal and vulnerable. That like, because we both didn't vote for Trump in the last election, we're both in on the same kind of joke. And so therefore that, you know, grants someone access to asking these even like more intimate questions about, oh, like, you know, do you think that your people are more homophobic than white people? And, or like, why do you think it is that like immigrant folks have such a difficult time with, you know, moving outside of their neighborhoods? Or like, why do you think immigrant folks, you know, really support gentrification? All these like loaded questions where, you know, they're a bit more intimate and like, I just met you, John. You know?
I like the names that you give to these like mysterious white people.
Yeah.
Babs is a good one.
Babs. Yeah, so I grew up in I went to elementary school in a school that was predominantly people of color, and it wasn't just like just like a few. We made up 80-90% of the population, and it was like wide amount of groups of Black students and Latinx students and Native students and mostly Southeast Asian students, along with other students from like North African and West Asian Arab backgrounds. And it was interesting because all of my teachers were white. And despite the fact that I grew up in a not predominantly white school, the feeling of whiteness is always present. And when people think about the South, there are certain politics that people cling on to. And geographically speaking, I would say Oklahoma is the most northwest point of the South. It is where you go up north and it becomes the Midwest. So it's the, you know, those like transient borderlands of the Midwest and the South. And I really think that like having that Southern upbringing affected me because I did grow up around Confederate flags. I grew up around people who had Confederate flags and, you know, were threatening to me. Race is such a complex sort of legacy in that, no, the Confederate flag was not aimed at Asian Americans. And yet, with its history nowadays, has shifted and morphed to also represent a certain sort of xenophobia that was not the original, perhaps, intention of that flag, and yet those policies develop and evolve over time. And I think just like, I think I have like a really hard reaction to seeing the Confederate flag because no, it wasn't aimed at bodies like mine. And still, there is a certain place where I have seen that flag currently aimed at me. And I know that from personal experience. And it's hard to be able to figure out where the legacies of race intersect and fall out within the South, I really feel like, because I think often a lot of scholars on Asian American Southern colonialism focus on the Pacific Islands, the West Coast, California, but often I don't think we really understand how Asian Americans uphold Southern colonialism in a geography like the South, where like there's a more present history of what anti-Blackness and the legacy of slavery has done for those communities, and how do immigrants or refugees even fit into that racial matrix. And at least in New England, it's really quiet and subdued, but in the South, it's present. There wasn't a day where I did not think about race growing up.
Yeah, the South is scary. I say this, I'm like, you guys are like, oh my god, of course, right? No, but like the closest I'd ever gone to the South, and this is the day that I decided whether or not my committee was going to judge me about where I decided to apply for jobs at the end of the day. I had like hard lines, right? Like there are places I will not live. The closest I ever got to the South, I was working on the Obama election. My job was to go to offices in swing states and diagnose why they were underperforming and then yell at the appropriate people. And then leave 3 days later. So one of these little trips, I was in Harrisburg, and I was walking to work. This is Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So this is like arguably the tip of the Bible Belt, if you're familiar with the area. And I'm like walking to work, and there's like a dude, his name was probably John, and he had a red pickup truck and a Confederate flag on the back. It was like magical, because it was like it's like when stereotypes are actually true. And I was like, okay, like this is the place where this exists. And then so I'm like walking to work, and he rolls down his window and he looks at me with a gun of some sort, maybe shotgun, I don't know. And he was like, let me show you what a real man can do, you commie faggot. So I ran. And then I was like, well, at least it's intersectional. And
Gotta take small victories where you can.
yeah.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks. I think it was John.
Oh. Sorry, I already forgot that.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about, how it is that you've sort of used poetry and performance to kind of find ways to be able to flourish and find life and to give life to people, to enliven people, right? In light of these kinds of experiences, or in light of the endless amount of bullshit that people have to encounter. This is a version of a question that's something like, tell me about when it's hard.
Yeah. So I gained my notoriety in the game of Poetry Slam, which is like literally a competition in which people assign numbers to poets performing their work. There are a set of rules, and for like 3 minutes, you do your poem. If you go over time, you get points deducted. It originated as a bar game in Chicago. And Chicago is the birthplace of the contemporary poetry slam. And in there, I have to remind myself that within 3 minutes, when I do these competitions, I have 3 minutes to convince someone that like my life has importance, that there's a certain mattering to my life, that the narrative I'm about to present to them should matter to them too. And within 3 minutes, even if they don't see me as human, I have to figure out how in 3 minutes I can get someone to humanize me. And that isn't the whole scope of my work. I do poetry outside of that competitive game. And yet, I think what it really challenges me is how to be succinct enough so that like my poetry moves beyond the ornamental and the flourish, and moves it to immediacy and urgency, because I could be writing about trees right now, but I'm not. With my poetry, I think at the end of the day, I'm trying to convince strangers that my life matters, and the things that have happened to me are important, and my survival is important and should be a concern to a stranger. And I'm not always successful. I don't always get people to humanize me in those ways, much like that happens in everyday life. But I think I flourish because there are people who are empathetic. I love seeing someone's face get transformed when they see me perform, because how often do most people see like an Asian American performer of any sort, but then like a queer Asian American performer, and then like a trans feminine queer Asian performer. And that's where I return to the novelty of my identity, so that like there's something exotic that I have to lean into. I do have to lean into the exotic and novelty of who I am, because people are interested. People are like, oh, I've never seen that kind of person before. And I think when I'm able to at least hook someone on, I just have to be honest with what's happened to me. You know, like, facts are most definitely facts, and I present a version of my life as happened to me, but I also mix it with imagination, that what has happened to me doesn't have to be a factual recount of what's happened to me. I want to remember my past in magical ways, because oftentimes what has actually happened to me is darker and scarier and rawer. And I think I still flourish because there are people in my life who see the humanity in me, and without them, without the reminder that my life is worth living, I wouldn't do what I do.
Thank you. I'm gonna change it up a little, precisely because I have one kind of last thing I want to ask. And it's a specific thing, and I'm glad that this is where it's coming, which was about, like, I want to change it up a little, because you had said, when you were up here, you said it can be exhausting sometimes, the like constant narratives of trauma, of oppression, of suffering, something about the always bearing the burden of being a figure of injury or something like that. And the other way that I was thinking about it even earlier was something like, you know, something like brown bodies and queer bodies are always read to be dramatic. It's like an event. Like, you don't walk into a space as a queer brown person, for instance, and you're just a person, you're an event. It is dramatic, it is a happening. Like the way that when you introduce somebody, you have to say, this is a queer, trans feminine, like Asian American, something, right? It's like you always have to be that, and be that first, and then find a way to be human within that. So my question is, you know, in trying to, let's say, peel ourselves away from that a little bit, or trying to fight against it a little bit, like, how do you take in the moments when you get to relax, or be silly, or be trivial, which I think is like a really privileged thing, to be trivial, you know, so that's sort of a question.
Yeah, I think that's a complicated question to answer, because I don't know if I've had that in a while.
Well, you're on tour now.
Yeah, and I have been like working nonstop in various ways, and those glimpses of rest, you know, it is important to rest, especially in a world that never stops feeling urgent. There's always something that can command you to move, and I think one of the most major things for me has been, like, you know, turning my notifications off for social media. I don't get like push notifications from anything anymore, and that, like, I really hate the idea that this technology can command me to access it, when really, like, I'm the human, you know? Like, I don't think it's like anti-robot to be like, no, like you really should not be telling me when I should be looking at the phone. Like, and having that sort of, you know, that makes me not think about, I have to treat things so urgently that what happens in the news is always happening. There's always a trash fire somewhere. And our time is even more limited than that, right? That if we were to extinguish every fire and focus all of our energies onto everything that happens, it would get really exhausting and fatiguing. And there are times when I do have to turn off the technology. And I'm moving to my partner's farm in southern Rhode Island sometime this month. And it'll be the first time I'm not living in a city, because I've lived in cities my whole life. And it's interesting to go into a rural space, and yet what I think I'm most excited to do is feel the dirt. Like, when was the last time you just got dirty? And like, I don't know, like, I think that it's genuine.
That's time.
Like, as a genuine, like my parents didn't take us camping. They're like, you know, they would say like, we escaped the jungle. You want to go back to the woods for what? And I was like, I was like, true. Like, so like, I don't know how to hike and climb, and like, I don't understand the appeal of eating granola bars as like a meal. But like, I'm excited, you know, to return to nature, because so often like queer bodies, and black and brown queer bodies, you know, are so centralized in urban areas, so that when we go into the rural area, there's always a inherent feeling of fear, because it is very dangerous. And yet, I think, you know, like, I just quit my day job. No, I say all that because I'm ready to move on to the next stage of my life where I'm farming. I think farming has a certain urgency that we don't really associate. But like, things will always need to grow out of the ground. We will always need vegetables to feed ourselves. We will always wake up to the sun rising. And, you know, who am I to say the sun is going to rise and I'm not going to offer anything that could use the sun for food? You know, like I'm feeding people, I'm feeding plants, I'm feeding my babies when I like put them into the ground. And when I take them out of the ground, when they're ready, I'm feeding other people. And I think I'm ready to just slow down for a little bit, because after living in New England, in such an urgent place where things are so fast-paced, I'm ready to slow down. And like, I'm so ready to be able to return to my creative work, which I really haven't done in such a long time. And I'm ready to just like wake up to my dog, wake up and like just be like, yeah, I'm gonna go till the soil. I don't know what farmers do, you know, I haven't moved there yet. But how do I keep going? I think it's like finding joy in the mundane, because the mundane is the majority of life. And I wouldn't want work to be the majority of my life. Or at least, you know, like, that's an idealistic thing. Like, that's not realistic capitalism, you know? But,
What does that mean?
hashtag capitalism. The last thing I'll say is I'm excited to spend time with my friends, which I haven't done. And like, it's really important to be with your friends, I think, because those are the people who catch you the most. You know, like, when I'm in trouble, you know, I'm not going to run to my therapist. I'm not going to run to my mom. I'm not going to run to like anyone but my friends. And I think people forget how important that kind of platonic intimacy can be. That, you know, I call that sisterhood. When I'm with my like sisters, when I'm with people who see me for who I am, and don't expect me to be anything else except myself. Yeah, I'm excited to wake up with my dog.
This really comes full circle. You can go plant trees and then write poems about them. And just, you know, be a part of the canon. It's going to be great. I'm gonna just open it up for questions. If people have time, I know that time is of the essence or something, and that it's getting late. But if people want to jump in, yeah.
I asked this question of a lot of like immigrant or like children of immigrant poets, but how do you like reconcile like writing in English with like being
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's a necessary contradiction, right? Because I think it is a phenomenal thing that right now we are using English to communicate, to criticize the people who, coerced us into assimilating into using English as our language. And that's a sort of like contradictory power that can I use English better than the people who forced it on me? And point blank, I would say that like black and brown writers and writers of color are really doing a really astounding stuff, because no one's ever expected a certain kind of literacy from those kinds of bodies, but then to also say that we can command that language even better, I think is really jarring for a lot of people. I have no interest necessarily in writing in Vietnamese because that is my experience, because I lost fluency. I don't think in that way. I don't experience my life through that language. I experience my life through English and all the consequences of what English as a mother tongue or as like a main tongue carries a certain sort of like set of consequences and histories with it. However, I understand, the concern. Just recently I was asked a very similar question, like, do you ever feel like you're recolonizing yourself by using English to write? And the answer is no, because I think we're more nuanced than that. And more than anything, immigrant bodies often live in contradiction, and I don't aim to refute myself outside of contradiction. It can be okay for me to be critical of English while also weaponizing English for my own purposes. And yet, I also have to remind myself that using English carries all the privilege of being a fluent English speaker, has with it too. So it's hard, it's contradictory, but I think oftentimes we find ourselves in moments of contradiction, and that makes us that feels the most human to me.
That's great.
Just now you had a poem on visibility. I thought it was kind of interesting. I said it was like a double-sided mirror or something about how there's like people taking your concepts and sort of steering it versus like completely disappearing altogether. And I think it's just interesting that like telling a stranger your story in 3 minutes to me sounds extremely daunting, and just it takes a lot of bravery and courage. I don't know, how did you get into that, or how did you decide that this is something that needs to be seen? Or
Yeah, I guess in high school I thought I was going to be a photographer. I wanted to be like a Stephen Meisel type. I wanted to do fashion editorials and shoot for like Talent and Vogue. And I really wanted to go to NYU Tisch Arts, and I got in, and they offered me like no money because their financial aid doesn't exist, and it's like mostly merit-based. And it was really strange because I had spent 3 to 4 years of my life and in my teenagehood working on photography as my primary craft. And my father was a photographer, and my mom, works with Photoshop. And I've always grown up around cameras. And when I finally learned how to do self-portraiture, that was a really interesting thing for me, because I've never been asked, how do I want to represent myself if I had the option, if I had complete control? And I loved that visual language. And it was also boosted by the fact that I was in speech therapy for my elementary school years. I learned English as a second language. I had stutter, a humongous lisp, more pronounced than it is now, and different sort of speech impediments of all kinds. And I was under the assumption that the things that would come out of my mouth were not valuable because they didn't sound right. And even now, I'm like, well, if my voice is like too clockable, if people can instantly know like, oh, that bitch is trans because of the way my voice sounds. Like, I have so many insecurities related to voice, and yet it wasn't until I moved into poetry, I had a mentor, Paul Tran, who, really encouraged me to realize that like poetry can be a useful tool for myself, but also my voice in and of itself. So I moved away from photography, relying only on visual sort of elements to describe myself, and I learned that
adult poets, like adult poet performers. Like I did poetry in high school, and so I feel like that was like a whole culture in itself. But I wonder, just like in like the professional world,
Yeah.
right? It's the professional world, right, and the competitive world. What that's like.
What's it like playing with the big kids?
Kind of, but also like how are, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for a lot of the people who have been adults for a long time and have been doing this profession for a long time, they've not seen a performer like me within, throughout their whole careers. And so when I entered the scene, I challenged the notion of like, what can be seen as successful poetry.
Does that have meaning?
But in terms of like adulthood, like I struggled to find myself being seen as like legitimate enough, because I think there is like that kind of like stigma against young people, and I feel like there are a lot of young people who now have access to social theory at a young age. Like I felt like I was reading about I was reading like Bell Hooks and Judith Butler on Tumblr when I was like 15 and 16. And like there are some like young people are like getting really into social theory, and like not to say that social theory is an approach to learning about identity and power and oppression, but like that was really formative for me. And so a lot of young people have this sort of like, I would say, agenda with their poetry, because young people have been growing up through some shit right now. Like, and I think it's strange for adults to think that like young people have something worthwhile to say. And even then, I still struggle to understand myself as an adult, but like, I'll pay my own taxes, and I suffer the consequences of my actions. And I think I learned that from adults, because when I see adults miss the mark, I understand that like the responsibility of a poet is to ensure that there can be a voice naming the unspoken. And I've seen too many adult poets misspeak and give name to things that did not need to be named. I'm being purposefully vague, but
Yeah.
But in that, I'll also let you know as I get older too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and there's something particularly difficult about how it is that one measures generations and how it is that one measures age. Like, there's straight time, and then there's queer time,
Yeah.
or there's like white people bougie time, and then there's like brown people time, right? Like, this thing that happened to me in Harrisburg, like I was 16-ish or something, 17? I was really young. I was really young when it happened. And I was like, oh, like, I can go back out now into the world and feel like though I am young, right, like one lives through something, and there are plenty of people who have like lived through a thing, and sometimes it can be hard speaking in the face of people who are older, for instance, who imagine that we all live in the same time.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think about that too as like when I think about what my parents envisioned Vietnam to be like, they're thinking about a country in that experience from a certain time. And I think it's part of migration that you think of the previous place as frozen and static, and the ability to imagine what it can be is even harder to do when you move away from it, because you don't want to lose that sense of the past. And I kind of have to think of think about like, when I move away from places, they continue to evolve, that they continue to progress. And that is like a colonial mindset that's passed down from European explorers who thought that because countries and communities had not been touched by them, they were obviously backwards and that they could not possibly be progress. Progress being a loaded word, but yeah, like I have to remind myself that like things change over time in ways that like I literally cannot imagine.
Wait, you were reading social theory on Tumblr?
It really was there when I was 16.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys experienced that? Oh my god. I'm not that much older than you. I'm just like, I was having this conversation with gentleman who left about how I realized like I'm of a different there's age generations, and then there's queer generations or like gay generations or something.
True.
And like I came out before gay marriage was like a thing. I came out before Glee was a thing. So I came out to a world of like Indigo Girls and Regina Spektor and like Tegan and Sarah recently did their 10-year tour their 10-year what's called anniversary tour of the con, and I was like, oh my god, I like had that when it first came out, and that's what I came out to. Right? Like I came out to the only way to learn about gay and lesbian culture, specifically lesbian culture, was to like go to your college library and find zines and then sob and read them in the corner. Yeah, so I'm just like kind of fascinated. There's a question in here somewhere just about like how different that experience must be when I really think about it now.
I mean, I feel like it's really interesting now, like BuzzFeed and all these other media websites, like they're naming like Kimberly Crenshaw from the get-go. Like they do videos about intersectionality, and I'm like so jarred when I hear the name Kimberly Crenshaw, and I'm like, oh, like BuzzFeed is really out here teaching the kids. I don't know how carefully or how effectively, but like that to me was not present.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I didn't know what gay was until I left home. Like I actually did it. So this is just Kimberly Crenshaw on BuzzFeed. Like what is this? That's like wonderful and also terrifying. I know. So we're running low on time. I don't see their organizers. Do you guys want to do one more question, or do you want to wrap up and then sort of do like food infused casual chatting?
I think one more question is fine.
Oh, okay. It was like an either or question, and you said yes. So okay, sure. Yeah. Is there just like another question, or do you guys want to kind of just eat and chat? Is this a vote for eat and chat?
I want to ask another question though. I feel like I've used up my question.
No?
Do it.
Okay. My second question is like when it comes to something that I've noticed when I'm like trying to like submit to like poetry journals and stuff is that they always ask you for a bio, and I'm always like, should I stack up like every single adjective that like describes each of my like marginalized identities in this bio? Like, is that what they're asking of me? And it's like a very stressful thing because I'm like always on the one hand like maybe they'll like feel bad for me because I have obviously a terrible life, or like maybe they'll and it's like always like really complicated, and I just wonder like, is that something that you still deal with, or is it like, because I feel like you're so visible now, like you kind of already have like a bio in the world that, I don't know.
I really struggle thinking about like, do you name your identities in your biography, regardless of like where it is, because like these like do professors name that like they're a certain scholar of a certain experience, and like like I would say like what you feel urgent or necessary, but like I feel like it is often very easy to overstate your identity and feel like that does all the work for you. I think it's like really easy to say that like because I'm queer and Asian, I'm going to have a certain experience, and that can like often be a code for them to like not do that legwork to understand who I actually am. But then in terms of a artist biography, I would say do what feels necessary to you and not what feels ornamental, because sometimes people can really overstack who they are. And not to say that's not who they are, but I think we often confuse naming who we are as an excuse to not, explain who we are outside of those identities. And I don't mean that in a colorblind way. Like I'm not Asian, but I really mean that like sometimes I can just say I'm Asian, and that will be the last thing people will want to know about me. And they'll be like, I already know what your poems are going to be about. I already know what your work or narratives are going to be about. And yet, oftentimes it's really exciting to not have to live up to that coded expectation. So
I like that, of not letting your reader be off the hook. Or like not letting them off the hook, not letting them be lazy.
yeah.
That's what it is. Yeah, but I do also, I like the advice of like, if you need to feel like you are claiming a space for something, that's also important. Well, we're running out of time. I want to thank Chrysanthemum like one more time. Make time for us in Chicago on this beautiful day. Eat.
Thank you all so much for spending so much time this evening here. It's been a long time. I don't even know what time it is. It was like 4 a.m.
Oh my god, it's 8:27.